Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we're going to finish up chapter 9 of Chaos, 9 of 12. Now, I looked ahead. 10 is probably going to be a three-parter, but chapter 11 is the longest chapter of the whole book. So let's finish chapter 9 today. This one will probably be a little bit short, actually. It's hard to divide them up sometimes because there's like sections within a chapter, and I try to not stop mid-section, if that makes sense, but sometimes that doesn't make it divide up quite equally. So anyways, let's do this. Hope everyone's doing great, by the way, and thank you for coming back for more of this book that I find fascinating. I think some of you do too, hopefully. Okay, so the next, this is a funny section. Well, I don't know if it's funny. The name of it is funny. 14 naked hippies in a ditch. Should be interesting. Although naked hippies are probably, is that surprising? Hippies were kind of, like if you think back to Woodstock and stuff, probably not too surprising. All right, so let's see. After the Florida letters, the record of Manson's supervision stops for another 5 months, a period during which Manson reported to Smith on a weekly and sometimes daily basis. That's interesting, right? He's there daily basis sometimes, and there's no record whatsoever. Seems a little suspicious to me. As he turned his soul-searching followers into program killers and planned for a race war. Once again, when you hear yourself say it out loud, it sounds silly. It sounds silly, right? I don't know. I was going to say I wasn't alive. No, I wasn't alive in the 60s. I was not born until the late 70s, so. But, yeah, race wars, and I don't know. I know that there was a lot of civil rights stuff going on at that time, so maybe I'm the ignorant one here. Okay, there should be an avalanche of paperwork on Manson from this time. While certainly Smith wrote reports, the parole commission released only 12 documents from his 14-month supervision. Because of the implications toward them, I suspect. The Los Angeles portion of Manson's file, covering approximately May 1968 to October 1969, is nearly as incomplete, with 16 letters from agency officials and Samuel Barrett, who succeeded Smith as Manson's parole officer. Okay, so he did have another one, but I don't think we're going to hear too much about Barrett. Smith is the dodgiest one, if you ask me. As few as they are, those letters depict an unmanageable parolee at odds with the excellent progress described by Smith a year earlier. I mean, I think that tracks with, I know probably most of you didn't read Helter Skelter. I did read it before this, just to kind of see where the discrepancies were. But he sounds like he would be unmanageable from all of the accounts. I mean, I assume Bugliosi got some of it right. He just whitewashed some. But yeah, it doesn't seem like he'd be a real model parolee. So that tracks a little bit more to me than the excellent progress that Smith was describing. Okay, Barrett once wrote to Manson, considering the nature of your last 2 arrests and the suspicion you have aroused with law enforcement in this district, the reflection of your status leaves much to be desired. So I don't think Barrett was in on this whole San Francisco project thing. It doesn't sound like. Let's find out. Despite this admonishment, Barrett was the parole officer Bugliosi singled out for blame at the trial in Helter Skelter. Now, if it was me that they were trying to pin the blame on when it was clearly someone else, I think I would have something to say. So if they're blaming Barrett, would he not be called to testify and maybe defend himself? I would think so, but let's see. Not Smith, the foster parent to Manson's baby. Not Smith, the proud possessor of an affectionate nickname for Manson. Not Smith, the parole officer who praised Manson's progress, allegedly without knowing he had been criminally convicted 3 days previously. By smearing Barrett, Bugliosi diverted attention from Smith's seemingly far graver sins. Yeah, what were the graver sins? Probably hidden in those files that are sealed. After all, where Smith's caseload had dwindled from 40 to just 1, Barrett had between 250 and 300 parole cases between 1967 and 1969. But in Helter Skelter's more than 700 pages, Bugliosi could spare only 21 words for Roger Smith, whom he never called to testify at trial. Like I said, if you kind of have that mindset that Bugliosi did things the way that someone up above him wanted, and they probably did not want Roger Smith mentioned or called, that kind of tracks in my brain. Smith told me that he was never questioned about Manson by Bugliosi, the police, or any federal agency, ever. There was probably some agreement that he would have some kind of immunity, is my thought. I don't know. I knew there had to be more papers from Smith's time as Manson's parole officer. Remember, under oath at the trial, Barrett had described Manson's parole file as about 4 inches thick. I asked the Parole Commission spokesperson, Pamela Posh, how it could have been reduced to what I'd been told was only 138 pages, and why I could see only 69 of these, extensively redacted. The Bureau of Prisons apparently did not retain all of the parole documents pertaining to Mr. Manson. Now, isn't that convenient once again? Apparently did not retain all the parole documents pertaining to Mr. Manson, Posh wrote, conceding that this was unusual and highly convenient for some, it seems. The Bureau had a policy to preserve the files of notorious felons for history's sake. Now, if this dude is not a notorious felon, I don't know who is. Every scrap of Post-it note should have been preserved. But as we saw, it was not. And as they said, Bugliosi himself removed stuff from the files, probably burned it in his fireplace, or who knows. And again, I hope somebody somewhere, I mean, I know these people, most of them are dead and gone, but who knows, maybe people squirreled stuff away and somebody will find it someday and it'll be some kind of bombshell that we hear about. We can hope, right? We can hope. I doubt it, but you never know. I mean, there's little, if some of you, I assume, watched my Lem Billings, the book I covered on Lem Billings, there were little tiny notes found from the president to Marilyn Monroe and back, and that little note that went like for auction for hundreds of thousands of dollars from, I think it was Jean Kennedy, it's either Jean or Pat Kennedy, to Marilyn Monroe about her and Bobby being an item. And those were just handwritten notes, so there could be stuff somewhere still out there. It's hard to say. Like I said, I will have a shred of hope, but not too much. Okay. Manson was about as notorious a felon as could be. I thought I'd exhausted my options, but then I remembered that Smith and Manson were part of the San Francisco project. Since it was a federal study funded by NIMH, which is the National Institute for Mental Health, I believe, it would have required even closer scrutiny of Manson's activities. According to Smith, its clients were to be tracked, analyzed, and recorded in a separate file. But it practically goes without saying that file was missing too. Can you trust anybody? That's what I want to know. Can you trust anyone in the government? And especially this time, let's say the Cold War era. This has nothing to do with the Cold War. I mean, I know that's how they defended their some of their research and stuff, was because they had found evidence that other countries were, doing mind control and that kind of stuff, and they wanted to keep up or catch up or surpass other countries. But I think some of it, you can use whatever convenient excuse you want for doing atrocious things, as we've seen throughout history many times over. If Smith maintained a close record of Manson, he kept a lot of people in the dark, including his own colleagues. He provided so few details that the parole officers in LA and San Francisco didn't even know where Manson was living. In April 1968, Manson was arrested yet again, and there was no covering it up. Too many papers had gotten the story. When Smith's colleagues at the parole office read about it, they flipped out and tried to do what Smith hadn't: send Manson back to prison. Imagine if that had happened and what could have been prevented. The headline in the LA Times read, "Wayward bus stuck in ditch. Deputy finds nude hippies asleep in weeds." First of all, okay, I'm thinking of the weeds around me. I live in the desert, so the weeds around me are very pokey and dry, and I wouldn't want to be sleeping in them fully clothed, let alone naked. But think about, weeds are itchy, and there's bugs and dirt. I couldn't have made it as a hippie for multiple reasons, but being dirty and sleeping in weeds, nude, probably not. Probably not. What about you guys? Other papers picked up the news too. Their articles were the first to describe what the world would soon know as the Manson family. The Times staff writer Charles Hillinger described an Oxnard deputy on a late-night patrol who stumbled on a broken-down bus in a ditch by the Pacific Coast Highway. When he saw the bodies scattered in the weeds, 9 women, 5 men, he thought they were dead. Then he realized they were only sleeping. Man, if I was on the Pacific Coast Highway, I'd make my way to the beach if I'm gonna sleep naked, not the weeds in the ditch. After running a check on the bus's tags, he learned it had been reported stolen from Haight-Ashbury. Waking the group, he told them to get dressed and wait for the county bus he'd ordered, which would take them all to jail. Before they left, one of the women, this is awful, you guys, later identified as Mary Bruner, said, "Wait, my baby's on the bus." She went back to pick up her child, then only a week old. Ugh, that poor little baby. He was sick with grime and open sores all over his body. Oh my gosh, this week-old baby. Oh gosh, it boggles the mind. It doesn't surprise me, but like I said, my husband and I were foster parents, and this is sadly not shocking to me, especially having been a baby nurse for many years. But it's heartbreaking every time, and that's why we became foster parents, to be honest. Seeing too much crazy stuff as a nurse with babies. And I'm a bleeding heart for babies. I think we all are. I mean, I don't know. I'm pretty sure. The article identified the self-proclaimed leader of the Band of Wanderers as Charles Manson, adding that he was booked on suspicion of grand theft. Bruner was charged with endangering the life of a child. She was later convicted and received 2 years probation. Where did the baby go? That's what I want to know. Within several days, the chief of the San Francisco probation office, Albert Wall, was alerted to an article about the arrest in the Oakland Tribune. 14 nude hippies found beside wayward bus. Of course, one of those hippies was a parolee under his office's supervision, and probably is not going to have to answer for this at all, is my guess. It's his baby too, and if you're neglecting / abusing a child, forget all the other stuff, stealing a bus and probably having underage nude women with you. I know it was a different time, but I would think, well, I don't know. I guess I don't know. That was a weird time in history. Wall flew into a rage, writing to his counterpart in LA, Angus McEachin, for assistance in finding Manson and sending him back to San Francisco. Wall had to admit, embarrassingly, that his office's file on Manson was incomplete, but apparently he had been traveling freely between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and probably Mexico, and who knows where else, for months. Wall didn't know if Manson had permission to travel, but one thing was clear, he added in a moment of supreme understatement: regulations weren't followed. Yeah, that's the understatement of the century. Smith's name didn't come up in the letter, but presumably Wall had him in mind when he wrote, "The officer who is handling the case is no longer attached to this office." Yeah, because it's a separate CIA op or FBI, who knows, allegedly. Incidentally, another rabbit hole, if you guys have ever done, I don't know if you're interested in the whole bomber, Ted Kaczynski. He was a child genius that went to Harvard at age 16, and they snatched him up and did CIA experiments on him as well. And look what happened to him. Like, it's sick and evil to just go break people's minds, obviously without their consent. And again, people in this World War II were tried and put in jail for the rest of their lives for doing stuff like this. How is it different on domestic soil? I contend, I don't know if it's worse, but it's as bad. I think you're in the fog of war, maybe you can claim some sort of, I don't know, the devil made me do it kind of defense, which doesn't work either, but I don't know. It's like, what? This is what fascinates me about true crime, the CIA, all that. Like, how does it happen? I just want to know. I mean, I know I can't explain it. I listened to this guy, his name's Andrew Bustamante, former CIA guy. I listened to his YouTube channel. He's pretty interesting. But he said that the CIA often recruits, broken people so they can kind of use their trauma against them. But it sounds like, it's like the student becoming the master kind of a situation, because then they go on. I mean, if this is a CIA thing, which is looking more and more like, taking broken people who experienced a lot of trauma, training them to basically weaponize that against other people too. It's evil. If you can think of a better word for it, please put it in the comments, but it's evil, pure evil. All right, moving on. Wall also wrote of 2 more arrests in McEachin's district, noting that Manson had failed to report them as required. For good measure, he sent a copy of his letter to the head of the national office in Washington, adding a copy of the Tribune story and a handwritten note. Be sure to read the clipping. There are people like this. I read somewhere too that a lot of the people that Manson hung out with in the music scene in LA, the Mamas and the Papas, who you don't hear too much about, the Beach Boys, and a lot of other celebrities. Manson knew these people, and Cass Elliot of the Mamas and the Papas, Mama Cass, she introduced Michael Caine to Charles Manson. Like, this guy was known, and you don't hear about too much of that stuff unless you go down rabbit holes like I do. But many people, they were afraid to testify against Manson because they didn't know what he was capable of. But it's alleged and reported in weird little off-the-wall publications that I've read that nobody was surprised when this happened. People that knew Manson, and a lot of people did, even though they said they didn't, said they were not surprised that evil stuff happened in his wake. So take for that, take that how you will. But yeah, I could link articles if anyone's interested in it. I've linked others that, well, you guys know if you've been watching. It is a rabbit hole. And they told Tom O'Neill that once he started reporting on this, it would take over his life. And it's definitely not going to take over my life, but I have gone down many a rabbit hole while reading this. Like I said, I like to give you guys interesting tidbits and asides that aren't part of the official record. And I've given you some that it just sounds so out there that I feel funny putting it out there, because you're like, oh, she's crazy. Well, we're all a little crazy, let's be honest. But anyways, I'm going to get back on track. But I do find the rabbit holes interesting too. I hope you guys do too. Let me know, please. Okay. The next section is called You Have Nothing More Important to Do. So far, the people like this had yet to suffer any consequences for their actions. Having been found the legal owner of the bus, Manson spent 1 day in jail. Then he was released along with the rest of the group. Okay, so if it was reported stolen, how was he the legal owner of it? That's interesting. Was he actually, or did they fabricate that too? It's hard to say. McEachin, the chief of the LA probation office, was not happy about this. He had something of a personal stake in Manson's fate. All the way back in May 1960, he'd been the one to violate Manson's probation for failing to report to his supervisor, sending Manson back to federal prison. So this guy McEachin sent him back to federal prison. I don't know if he's the one who way back said this guy he is not a good candidate for parole because he's going to not comply. And he was obviously right. But I bet he started looking into this and was like, what happened? I don't know. But once again, if there's some other overarching program that he's involved in, did that get swept under too? It's hard to say. He had every intention of following a similar course this time, but he soon learned that while Manson's probation had been easy to violate in 1960, things were different now. But this is only 7 years later, so that's interesting. In a letter to Wall, McEachin said that Manson had personally appeared in our office to bring us up to date on his adventuresome nature, claiming to have no interest in money or work. He has over 3,000 friends who are willing to give him any needed assistance. Now, is that true? Probably not. I mean, do you even know 3,000 people? I don't think I do. But he either helps himself to their things or has some weird hypnotism he has. Either way, it just doesn't pass the common sense test. Manson said that he owned the school bus and that he and his girls had been traveling between San Francisco and Los Angeles in it for months. If anyone from the probation office needed to contact him, he could be reached through a friend named Gary Hinman of Topanga Canyon. Now, if you remember, Gary Hinman ends up on the wrong side of Manson's broadsword. He cut his ear off with it and was murdered by others in the family. Susan Atkins and Bobby Beausoleil, I think. The same Hinman whom the family would murder about a year later. Manson had gall, but McEachin thought he'd gained the upper hand because Manson had since been arrested again, this time on a drug charge. Apparently, he was at that moment sitting in the LA County Jail awaiting arraignment. Sadly, McEachin was wrong. Manson had been released the previous day. For unknown reasons, the DA had declined to file charges. What could that unknown reason be? Not to be deterred, McEachin and Wall tried to rein in their wandering, law-breaking parolee. As the highest-ranking figures in their offices, they had a lot of clout, but not enough to catch Manson. Wall's most vigorous attempt came on June 3rd, 1968, when he sent a stern ultimatum to Manson's last two known addresses in San Francisco and LA. The latter belonged to Dennis Wilson. Because Wall didn't know Manson's exact whereabouts, he was forced to give him two options: report to the U.S. Probation Office in either city immediately. Failure to follow this direction, he wrote, will result in my recommending that a warrant for mandatory release violation be issued. From this point on, you are not to leave your current residence without written permission from a U.S. probation officer. Any permission given you by Mr. Smith, who is no longer connected with this service, is hereby canceled. Give this matter your immediate attention. You have nothing more important to do. So that's the memo from McEachin to Manson. And wouldn't you know it, Manson defied the orders. Rather than showing up in person, he made a phone call to Wall, who was out of the office, and furious to learn in a message taken by a subordinate that Manson had said he was living at Dennis Wilson's place and had been offered a $20,000 annual recording contract by the Beach Boys label. As Wall later wrote to McEachin, it would appear that Mr. Manson is on another LSD trip. Still, at least they knew where Manson was living now. Maybe he could have been lying. They didn't check it out. That was a step in the right direction, wasn't it? On June 6th, they sent Samuel Barrett, his new parole officer, to make an unannounced visit. As Barrett reported back, Manson and some of his hippie followers, mostly female, had found a haven at Wilson's home. Apparently, Wilson had succumbed to Manson's obsequious manner. Just how deeply had Wilson succumbed, though? Could it really be true that their delinquent parolee had sweet-talked a Beach Boy into giving him a record deal? Well, they did record one of his songs. I'll put up what it's called here. They stole it from him and he was pissed. I can't remember. They changed the name of it. It's like Never Forget Not to Love, something weird like that. I don't know. I'll put the exact name of it up here. I've thought about listening to it, but I don't know if I want to listen to anything written by this creep. I don't know. I don't want it in my brain, if you know what I mean. McEachin must have been relieved to hear from Nick Grillo, the Beach Boys manager. Requesting anonymity, Grillo complained, Manson and his followers are proving to be a threatening factor to the music company. The record label would have to be idiotic to have signed him. The parole office decided they had to order Manson back to San Francisco, making it clear that he'd return to prison if he failed to comply. Think he complied? We know he didn't. On June 12th, Barrett sent a letter giving him 12 days to return. Someone must have intervened. There's no record of what happened between June 12th and June 24th, the deadline, but apparently the deadline evaporated. Isn't that interesting? The next letters came in late July and early August. Making no mention of the skipped deadline, McEachin reported to Washington, D.C. that he'd received a phone call from Manson, who had moved on to the Spawn Ranch, where he was receiving free room and board in exchange for his work as a ranch hand. By then, someone above Wall, McEachin, and Barrett must have decided that it was best to just let Manson be. Who was it? Are we going to find out? We might not. Manson built the family right under his federal supervisors' noses. From then on, the federal government, as well as local and state law enforcement, only backed further away from the group as they more brazenly broke the law. The only one who didn't was someone who supposedly was no longer associated with him, Roger Smith. Well, after his supervision of Manson ended, he was still writing letters to the Mendocino County Court about Atkins and Bruner's sterling characters. And he was caring for Manson's son. Smith and his wife even hosted Manson at their home. With all I'd learned, I still couldn't grasp how a rock-ribbed Republican would fall in with an aspirant hippie like Manson, and why their friendship persisted beyond the dissolution of their official relationship. It's weird. You have to admit that it's weird. But if Roger Smith was a rock-ribbed Republican, and the goal of COINTELPRO and Chaos was to basically neutralize these left-wing groups, I mean, I can't imagine Manson actually being on the right. It's maddening because it just doesn't make sense at all. But unless they were just hanging the, hey, you can do whatever you want over his head, like, I don't know, he won't go back to jail. What do you guys reckon? Nothing makes sense in my mind. Okay, we're on to Coda, the speed scene. Smith may have had ulterior motives when he told Manson to move to Haight-Ashbury. As part of his criminology research, he'd been tapped to lead a study on amphetamines and their role in the violent behavior of Haight-Ashbury hippies. That's interesting because they mentioned amphetamines, and most of the time you hear about Manson, you hear about LSD being his thing. That's not to say he didn't use amphetamines as well. And amphetamines can cause a lot of rage and violence too. They amp you up a lot, is my understanding. I just have a shallow understanding of street drugs, but once again, I worked in a health office in a high school, and there were kids on stuff all the time, so we kind of had to have a base knowledge of what drugs do what, and so we could, how do I say this? So the things that we were seeing, we might get kind of an idea of what they may have taken. Moving on. The National Institute of Mental Health funded this study as they had the San Francisco project. So maybe we need to look more into the National Institute of Mental Health. Although you're probably not going to get anything but whitewashed information from there either. In 1976, a FOIA request forced NIMH to acknowledge that it had allowed itself to be used by the CIA as a funding front in the 60s. That's interesting. So the National Institute for Mental Health was a funding front for the CIA. Were they doing anything to actually benefit people's mental health? You gotta ask yourself that. Smith hoped to learn why some people, but not others, became psychotically violent on amphetamines, and to see if this violence could be controlled. The goals of the amphetamine research project, as he dubbed it, were to illuminate three major areas of the speed scene and the hate: the individual experience, the collective or group experience, and the way in which violence is generated within the speed marketplace. Smith studied hippie collectives by observing them in their daily routines, and he enjoined his research to participate too. That's interesting. He later recalled that when he was appointed to lead the study, I took off my gray flannel suit and my wingtip shoes and grew a mustache. Soon the kids on Haight Street were calling me the friendly Fed and asking me to help them with the law. There's no indication that his technique proved useful because there's not much indication that the ARP ever happened at all. Again, it may have happened, but there were no records left behind. Smith never published his research. 2 papers about the ARP were scheduled to appear in the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs, but they never materialized. The closest thing to a record of the ARP is Smith's unpublished dissertation submitted to Berkeley a month before the Manson murders. Why wasn't it published? Probably because he was associated with this madman. Even this, however, contains no actual participation/observation data. Well, yeah, he's not going to fess up to participating. When you write a paper like that, I'm sure many of the details are whitewashed. In fact, for every study that you read, there's dozens of others that didn't get the correct outcome, so they're scrapped completely. It's the cynic in me telling you what I can't say no, what I believe about peer review and all that good stuff. Anyways, but the paper, The Marketplace of Speed, Violence and Compulsive Methamphetamine Abuse, does describe the nature of participant observation, which Smith wrote forced a social scientist to break the law. Okay, so maybe he fessed up a little bit. Hiding in a deviant group, he had to convince drug users that they could trust him with information, which in other hands would place them in jeopardy. And perhaps most important, he must resolve the moral dilemma of being part of something which they may find morally objectionable, at best. Probably by association, he could himself be arrested. In a very real sense, he becomes a co-conspirator with information and insight which under normal conditions, the average citizen would be obliged to share with law enforcement. He must try to understand what individuals within the group feel, how they view the straight world, and how they avoid arrest or detection. To ensure success, Smith argued, researchers had to protect their subjects from criminal prosecution, concealing their activities from the police, and granting them anonymity in all reports. The ARP then had something resembling police immunity baked into its very mission. I had a feeling there was some immunity involved in here because how was this guy so influential in Manson's life and then barely even a blip on the official legal record? Got some backdoor dealings there. Smith ran the ARP out of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, which incidentally, that medical clinic existed up until this book came out, and there were so many revelations in this book. Well, I guess we can't say that's why the Free Medical Clinic closed, but shortly after this book came out, the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic closed its doors after decades. Make of that what you will. And like I said, Abigail Folger, one of the victims of the Cielo Drive massacre, was known to be someone who worked there, frequented the place. So make of that as you will. Okay, so Smith ran the ARP out of the free medical clinic, which had just opened the previous summer. Soon he was spending so much time there that he made a proposition to his only parole client. Instead of meeting with Manson in downtown San Francisco, where Smith had an office, why not just meet at the clinic? It was more convenient for both of them. And anyway, by that time, Manson and his girls had started to contract sexually transmitted diseases. The clinic could treat those for free. Well, sounds like something too good to pass up, huh? Soon, Manson became a mainstay at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. Between visiting Smith and receiving medical care, there were some weeks when he appeared at the clinic every day. He became a familiar presence to a number of the doctors there, including several who, like Smith, had received federal funds to research drug use among hippies. So these doctors were spooks as well, or researchers for whom the federal government, I contend. Smith got the ARP off the ground at the same time he was supervising Manson for the San Francisco project. It was during this overlap that the record of Manson's parole supervision was either spotty, non-existent, or later expunged. This funny, scruffy little visitor to the clinic, always with his retinue of girls, was taking a ton of drugs and forming the family. By the time he and his followers turned up in that ditch by the side of the Pacific Coast Highway in April of 1968, the girls had traded the flowers in their hair for steel knives, sheathed in leather and strapped to their thighs beneath long flowing dresses. I was convinced that Roger Smith had facilitated this transformation. Now I began to wonder whether the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, with its emphasis on hippies, drugs, and research, had some role too. I absolutely believe it did. And we are going to find out. The whole next chapter is called the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. And we're going to learn some things that will intrigue and trouble you, I guarantee. All right, so what did you guys think about that? I think it's interesting, like that McEachin dude, he had to be livid that this guy who he said was not a good parolee or a good candidate for parole at all because of his willingness to just flout the rules. 7 years later, it's like, what? This is the guy put back in jail for breaking the rules. And why is he allowed to just do whatever he pleases? And then after a little while, poof, everything's back to letting everything go. So someone must have come to him and said, hey, let's just put this aside for whatever reasons that we don't know and cannot prove yet at this point. Spoiler, I don't think it will be able to be proven, but the circumstantial evidence is astronomical in amount. But yeah, I think it's so crazy that Roger Smith, I don't know how the CIA works. Obviously, maybe some of you guys do. I don't know. All I know is about operations and stuff that I hear about, and even still, like, just people I hear doing interviews on YouTube about, they were a Navy SEAL and then they quit the SEAL teams and did some like contract work for the CIA. I don't know how the CIA works at all. Can some people just do little this and that jobs? I've always heard that once you're in, and you're kind of their slave, really. You can't get out. Once you're in, you can't get out, something like that. I don't know if it's true. I think we know as much as they want us to know, which is not very much. But what we do know is very intriguing, and yeah, what do you all think? Feel free to comment below what you think. Are you guys finding this interesting? I am. Just the corruption and the collusion between federal law enforcement, intelligence agencies, I mean, this is the LA police, but did it happen in San Francisco? Obviously, was a part of it. But does that happen all over the place or just in the major cities? Did it? Does it still? These are the thoughts that keep me awake at night because I am a total nerd about this stuff. Let me know what you guys think and if you had heard of any of this prior to us reading this together. Once again, I hope you're all enjoying. My family and I are on the road tomorrow for Yellowstone, so I don't know what time is it, 10 o'clock. I'm not sure. I might try to get another one in today, even though I should be packing. My kids are at summer school, so I have a very tight amount of time where I am by myself. And hey, I'm choosing to spend it with my favorite people. I do enjoy you guys so much, and it's fun to interact with you in the comments, especially the regulars. I come to think of you guys as my friends, so keep those comments coming, and I will see you in the next one. And if I don't make another one before the trip, wish me luck. It's going to be a car full of kids on a 10-day road trip, so it'll be good, but I'm sure there'll be some tense moments, and we're bored, and I have to pee, and are we there yet stuff. So anyways, all right, guys, take care of yourselves. See you in the next one. Bye.